Hey y'all, thanks so much for sharing your day with me wherever you are in the world. My name is Bethany and I'm a designer currently working in the cybersecurity space. I'm also a design ethicist, and some of you are asking yourself, well, what's a design ethicist? It's a self-appointed title that I have recently took on, but in all seriousness, I care deeply about creating with conscience and feel that creators working in the tech industry have a tremendous responsibility to build technology that respects people's time, mental space, and well-being. So when I was around 18 years old, I wrote a paper titled The Dangers of Multitasking, and today I'd like to share an excerpt from it. As I sit down to write this paper, I find my mind drifting, even as my hand continues to write. The TV is on, my iPhone is right next to me, and I sit in front of the computer while multiple tabs are open. What am I doing? I ask myself. I am multitasking. The very thing I'm about to prove is bad for you. So as y'all can see, I probably got like a D- on this paper, honestly, when I wrote it. But even from a young age, I've always been fascinated by the effects that technology has on our lives. Just in the past 8 years, we've seen the number of individuals who own a smartphone increase by 50%. And over a decade now, since smartphones have entered our lives, we're really beginning to feel their impact. The more tethered that we become, the more it raises the question of who's actually in control, because oftentimes it feels like technology is in control. Technology is in control of our time. The average person spends about 3 to 5 hours a day on their phone. And over the course of the average human lifespan, that can add up to 7 years of your life. Technology is in control of our emotions. 24% of teens stated that social media had a negative impact on their mental health. And how many of us can relate? We open Twitter, or Facebook, or Instagram, and we're faced with imagery and words that makes us feel kind of bad. And technology is in control of our attention. On average, humans spend 3 minutes on a task before switching to something else. And this constant task switching has really become the norm for how we go about our day-to-day lives. The world that we live in today is so consumed with these tiny computers, these mini devices in the palm of our hands. And it's fundamentally changing the way that we interact with each other, but it's also altering the way that our brains are wired. And technology, however you decide to define it, is such a key part of our world, and it's here to stay. And there are many wonderful things that come with that, such as the ability for me to connect with all of y'all today, no matter where you are in the world. But as with any sort of evolution, it's time that we evolve the way that we're creating for and consuming this technology. So let's start by taking a look at the ways that technology controls our time. And the primary method for controlling your time is through this tactic known as variable rewards. So variable rewards is a psychological term that describes a type of reinforcement schedule where rewards you're receiving are based at random. And this was studied by an American psychologist by the name of B.F. Skinner all the way back in the 1950s, who studied how humans respond to both positive and negative reinforcement. So Skinner was famous for what's known as the Skinner box experiment. And he put lab mice into a controlled environment. And what happened is these mice would press a lever and they would receive rewards at random, meaning that sometimes they'd receive a large piece of treat, other times they'd receive small pieces of treats, other times they'd receive nothing at all. And what he found is that these lab mice would press this lever compulsively because they couldn't anticipate what they would receive in return. So if you think about things that we may interact with as humans, this translates to the idea of a slot machine where you're pushing a button or pulling a lever, and there's a chance you could win $1 million, but there's also a chance you could lose 20 bucks. So think about the technology that we use. When we're pulling to refresh on an app to see if there's any new things in our feed or any new email, we're playing this game to see if we can receive any rewards in return. And when we swipe on dating apps looking for potential matches, we're playing this game to see if we can receive any matches in return. And what ends up happening is we are receiving these variable rewards that leads to feelings of dopamine being released in our brain. Now, dopamine is essential to us as humans. We need it to survive. It's good in healthy doses. But what this looks like is when you occasionally check your phone, you may find something satisfying, and that feels good, right? And that resulting burst of dopamine makes us begin to associate the act of checking our phones with the receipt of a reward. And we know that this becomes highly addictive. A study done in 2013 looked at brain activations in participants going through a gambling task. And you can see that the striatum region of their brain, which is associated with dopamine release, was highly activated. But even when these participants were faced with losses, they still found that these participants kept coming back for more. So variable rewards are a tactic that controls our time and gets us hooked. But bottomless bowls are a technique that keeps you hooked. And this was studied by a Cornell professor by the name of Brian Wansink. And what he's holding here is a bowl of refillable soup. And Wansink found that if you gave humans a bowl of soup that refills itself, they'll eat 73% more soup, right? So think about any sort of technology that might mimic this type of pattern. Infinite scroll is a perfect example. It encourages users to consume endless amounts of content without the technology offering a pause or a break. Video autoplay is another example of a bottomless bowl. It's designed to hook you. I can relate to this. I oftentimes find myself on a Saturday or Sunday night binge watching shows. But the term binge is associated with so many negative behaviors like binge eating and binge drinking. So why has this become the norm for how we're consuming video content? Also, great episode of The Office. Need to call that out. So autoplay in itself works with specific algorithms to serve up content that is designed to keep you engaged. But this becomes extremely dangerous when these algorithms are recommending videos that spread misinformation. This example from YouTube is showing a video from 2014 talking about child immunization. So before we even knew what COVID is or how to worry about it. So isn't it odd that YouTube is recommending a video with a very clickbaity title that potentially creates a polarizing thought in my mind? And we know that around 81% of users are interacting with YouTube's recommended content. Guillaume Chalet is a former YouTube engineer who worked on their algorithm, and he says this: the problem is the AI isn't built to help you get what you want. It's built to get you addicted to YouTube. And he's right. YouTube has consistently stated that they're not a partisan monster, but at the end of the day, we know that they're an engagement monster. So by controlling your time, this technology keeps you coming back for more, right? And that's something that's deeply rooted in our psyche. We can't always control that. But what about technology that changes and alters how we feel? Which leads me to my next point. Technology is controlling our emotions. We live in this generation of what I like to call manufactured scarcity, which basically means that there's this implication that some shortage exists only for the purpose of increasing desirability to consumers like you and I. So I'm going to tell you all a story of how I experienced this in real life the other day. Huge cereal person. Okay, I could eat cereal like every morning. I actually had this for breakfast this morning. And I was, shopping through the aisles at Sam's Club and saw this Swiss Miss Cocoa Puffs collab. And I was like, I need to have this. But the only reason I wanted it is because it said limited edition on it, right? And so in my mind, I equated that with, well, I don't know if this will be in stock next week. I might as well buy, 2 or 3 boxes while I'm here. And this sort of manufactured scarcity within consumerism leads to a fear of missing out. And we see this in so many areas of our life, but especially in technology. Like when we're shopping online and we're being told, this item is selling fast. It makes me feel like I need to purchase this dress right away. Or when we're shopping for vacation and we're being told there's only 3 tickets left at this price. One Travel is an online travel booking tool, and they use a tactic where they show you just how many people are looking at the flight. You can hear me take a deep breath, like it just stresses me out looking at this. But an eagle-eyed Twitter user did some research and found that this number is actually randomly generated. And we know this because it's labeled as such in their source code. So we know that these tactics are not always true, and they're used to manipulate us and invoke FOMO within us. And social media on its own depicts this world of highly curated content where everything you see is picture perfect and it just shows you what you don't have and makes you feel like you should have it. In October 2019, the Wall Street Journal published a series of articles chronicling some internal research that Facebook had been conducting on their photo sharing app, Instagram. So they looked into researching how Instagram is affecting the mental health of their teen users. And this is a screenshot from a presentation that was shared at Instagram titled Teen Mental Health Deep Dive. So they have statistics showing that teens who may be struggling with their mental health claim that Instagram makes it worse. And I do want to give a trigger warning that the next slide contains content related to self-harm and violence. So Instagram asked their users in the UK, of the things that you felt in the past month, did any of them start on Instagram? 29% of users stated the feeling of not feeling good enough started on Instagram. 7% stated the feeling of wanting to hurt themselves started on Instagram. And 13% stated that the feeling of wanting to kill themselves started on Instagram. Yet we've seen no action taken to help prevent against this or solve for this. Gia Tolentino is a journalist for The New Yorker, and she wrote an amazing article about how Instagram is affecting our society. So I love this quote where she says, "Technology is rewriting our bodies to correspond to its own interests, rearranging our faces according to whatever increases engagement and likes." And this isn't new news. We know that beauty standards on their own have always been defined by the media, but it becomes extremely harmful when we're quantifying our physical selves based off of online metrics such as likes and comments. In 2019, CVS announced that they would be putting this tag on all of their photos that have not been retouched. It's called the Beauty Unaltered campaign. So why can't we call on social media to do the same? Why can't we have some sort of tag that shows what photo editing software has been used in the creation of this photo? So by creating this FOMO in your mind and really controlling how we feel, technology has trained us to never want to miss out on information. So if technology oftentimes makes us feel worse, why are we so continually drawn to it? And that's because technology controls our attention. Technology companies pursue engagement as a science since there's such an ongoing fight for our end users' attention. The hook model burst onto the scene around 2013, and you can see they literally encourage the use of variable rewards to create a habit-forming addictive product for your users. And as designers, we have to get more and more creative about how we'll capture our end users' attention. And so certain interface patterns have really become the standard for how we go about doing that, such as notifications, for example. Did y'all know the original Facebook notification was actually blue to match their brand color? And no one was clicking on this. No one was interacting it. So they changed it to red and boom, clicking had started to skyrocket. A study done by CleverTap found that the average smartphone user receives about 46 push notifications a day. That's 46 times throughout your day that your phone has the opportunity to take you away from what you're currently doing. How many of us are familiar with this prompt? We see it so often. It's one of the first things that we see when we download an app for the first time. And even if we say, don't really want to set up notifications right now, these companies almost take a pleading tone. Please turn on notifications. They're literally dying to get your attention. And they love using push notifications because it's proven to be successful for business. It gets users on the app, right? So back in 2016, Tumblr ran this push notification campaign around new and trending tags. So one day, a user received this, beep, beep, hashtag neo-Nazis is here. And when confronted about this push notification on Twitter, the head writer for Tumblr at the time responded with, yeah, it's for track tags. We talked about getting rid of it, but it performs kind of great. Along with push notifications, modals or pop-ups or dialogues are another pattern in software that demands your attention. This is kind of the standard for how we use a website nowadays. I was just looking up a recipe the other day and I was hit with like all of these pop-ups and it was just very, very frustrating. I'm sure many of you can relate. And a study done by the University of Illinois found that when external factors like this interrupt the execution of a primary task, users will require about 15% more time to complete their task at hand. And a lot of modals use a pattern called confirm shaming, which is the act of guilting your user into something. So this example from Delish says 14 simple dinners for one, and the confirm shaming is, no thanks, I'll have microwave dinner tonight. And my all-time favorite from Esquire, 75 movies every man must see. And the confirm shaming says, no thanks, I'll stick to the latest Adam Sandler films. Ouch. So technology trying to control your attention is forcing us to multitask, but multitasking is impossible for the human brain. It's actually just task switching. And a study done by a group of cognitive neuroscientists found that over time, multitasking can lead to a reduced amount of gray matter in our frontal lobe. What is a reduced amount of gray matter? It's found in patients who are suffering from Alzheimer's disease, depression, and PTSD. So we know that this constant multitasking can be really detrimental to our brain development over time. So by controlling your time, your emotions, and your attention, this technology is really changing us psychologically and socially. I think an unexpected consequence of our personal devices has made it such that we never have to be alone with our thoughts. Whenever we're waiting in line at a coffee shop or waiting for the elevator, my instinct is to pull out my device, right? But what this does over time is it creates a cycle of dependency where we use our phones as a pleasant numbing distraction. So it starts by you feeling some sense of discomfort. For me, that's Sunday night, the Sunday scaries start kicking in. I'm a little bored and all I want to do is really just scroll through TikTok. And our bodies as humans, we naturally want to self-soothe. We're wired to survive. So when we feel discomfort, we want to solve for that. And if the only way that you know how to do that is through the use of your device, it creates this pattern and this cycle that becomes really hard to break over time. I worry that we are beginning to fear our own minds because we never let our brains get into a state of rest anymore. Have y'all ever been like driving in a car and suddenly you don't remember maybe the last 2 to 3 miles? That's your brain getting into a state of rest where you're able to think creatively and think of new and creative ideas. Amy Fries is a psychologist, and she says this: when your mind is able to wander, it is assessing memories, emotions, and random bits of stored knowledge. So not only is technology affecting the way that our brains and our minds are wired, but it's changing us socially and how we build relationships. And it's ironic that these devices that were originally meant as a communication tool are now hindering our social selves and driving us apart. A study done in 2018 looked at 143 couples, and out of those, 70% cited smartphones as interfering with their marriage. And there's become such a phenomenon that there's a word for it. It's called phubbing. Sounds kind of awkward, but it's when someone is ignoring you and paying attention to their phone instead. And we know that just through the presence of these devices, it can really change and alter the way that we're interacting with our coworkers, our family, and our friends. Doreen Dodgen-McGee is a psychologist, and she says this: we don't engage the people and places surrounding us because we have come to prefer the company of devices that ask so little of us in return. And I believe that while we're being more aware of these issues as a society, I think the fix for this is starting at the root of the problem. It's time that we create with conscience. How can we as creators working at the front lines of tech begin to build technology that's healthier and respects people's time. I don't think devices themselves are inherently bad. I believe that it's the software that inhibits these devices and the people building that software that may not have your best interests in mind. Mike Monteiro is another design ethicist, and he says this: we're no longer pushing pixels around. We're building complex systems that touch people's lives, affect their personal relationships, and undeniably affect their mental health. So what I'd love to share with y'all today is 3 principles that you can take away to create with conscience. And the first is building in healthy boundaries. So ask yourself and your product team or your service, whatever you're building, is interrupting your user's workflow really best via a notification or a modal? And how can you give back control to your end users? Also consider building in tools into your platform that promote digital well-being. So I'm going to share some examples of things that I think are being successful in terms of healthy boundaries. So Slack has a really amazing, robust notification preferences panel, meaning I could be notified for every little ping or nothing at all. And it puts the control in the user's hands. The dating app Bumble has a snooze feature, which encourages users to spend time away from the app, and they can set their profile to away. In their latest OS update, Apple has released a series of focus modes that allows you to literally silence notifications for anything and everything if you'd like. Do not disturb is my best friend. So the second principle in creating with conscience is anticipating unhealthy behaviors. And I think as designers, we oftentimes focus on the wonderful, beautiful ways that people will be using our software. But that's not always the case. Humans are complex people with complex emotions and behaviors, such as depression. Think about, is your product elevating, stimulating, or triggering symptoms of depression? And how could someone with a mental illness use your product to hurt themselves? Consider addiction. Does your product promote long-term use? And what's the worst case scenario for users that may be susceptible to addiction? And think about exclusion. Is your product truly accessible to all users, regardless of disabilities, language, culture, education level, and race? And could your product be used to exclude certain groups? We have to start considering these questions at the very beginning of our product development lifecycle. And the last principle in creating with conscience is changing how we measure success. So I think a collection of success metrics I see often is heavily focused on the health of the business rather than the health of your customer or your end user. So you'll see things like clicks, shares, signups, views. This is all just a fancy way of saying engagement at the end of the day. And I want you all to know I have been in this exact situation. At a previous company, I was working on building this area of the website. We really wanted users to click on this one particular area. And we used a technique called mouse out. So whenever they would move away from what we wanted them to click on, we would, boom, hit them with the dialogue. I'm like cringing telling this story to y'all, but I share this in hopes that you'll see that this is such an easy trap to fall into. So to shift the metric away from engagement, I recommend using a template such as goals, signals, metrics. It's not anything revolutionary, but I think it really can hone in on what it is that you're measuring and how you can shift that away from just the health of the business and the health of your end users. And I really believe that this collection of principles can empower our users to build healthy habits and relationships with technology. Because as designers, that is half of our job, is dictating how people are creating and using the digital products that we create. And what happens when you step away from being so digitally distracted all the time? Chances are you'll enjoy the moment. You'll be more content. You'll be more in tune with yourself. And most importantly, you'll be present with the people surrounding you who matter the most. You can find everything I just talked about today on createwithconscience.com, including the goals, signals, metrics framework for you to download and use personally. And I just want to extend my immense gratitude today for your time and attention. Thank y'all so much.